What is up, everybody? Welcome to this Trainwreck Sports Podcast, where we are here to pay the bills, presented by Outlet Liquor. Jake Micah, another week closer to the NFL draft. This week joined by Carson Hyatt. Carson, how are we doing today? And brand new guest on the show, Josh Ferry. Josh, how are we doing today? Welcome to the Pay the Bills Podcast. Welcome to your inaugural run here on the show.
Yeah, same. Me too. Happy to be here and excited to talk Bills.
Hell yeah. Carson, how we doing, buddy?
Well, it's always a great day when you have the opportunity to talk about the Bills, especially in a time like this. You know, draft right around the corner. We got some stuff to talk about. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, there's plenty to get into. I can't believe we're just over a week away here. Wednesday night, next Thursday, we'll see the draft board start falling, and we'll all be. Draft night used to be. Well, I guess it used to be a little more exciting. Not exciting, but a little easier to take in when, we were picking in the top 10, 15. You at least knew, like, okay, we'll be here for like an hour. Now, who knows how long this night could be. We went live a couple years ago for a Bills stream. I think it might have been the Russo draft. And what pick was that? 27? That was a long night, starting from pick 1 on to 27. That turned into a long night. But it's a pleasure to be in that spot. They're at 28 this year. And who knows? They could be moving up, could be moving down. I'll ask you guys about that a little bit later. But the first thing we're going to talk about is kind of just take a look at who the top 30 visits have been. The top 30 visits wrap up today and see if they give us a peek into what the Bills draft strategy is going to be. So I'll run through it here. And then, Josh, I'll start with you to see what your thoughts are. And then we'll go to Carson. So the top 30 visits, Audric Estim, running back, visited today. Rook Horohoro, I'm saying that right, DT from Clemson, projected as a day 2. Cooper DeJean, DB at Iowa. Latu, edge in the first round. Quantez Stiggers, who is a CFL player, day 3 pick, potentially. Keon Coleman visited. Mason Smith, DT, potentially round 3-4. Andrew Phillips, a DB. Xavier Worthy with a top 30 visit. Ryan Flournoy from Southeast Missouri State. Speedy late round receiver. Troy Franklin, 2nd and 3rd round pick. Trey Benson from FSU, potentially 2nd or 3rd round pick. MJ Devonshire, corner from Pitt. Jordan Morgan, a tackle from Arizona. Tez Walker, the UNC wide receiver. Marshawn Nealon, the D end from Western Michigan. And Christian Boyd, the D tackle from Northern Iowa. Those are all the names as of right now that have visited for the top 30 that we know about. I'm sure there'll be a couple more that we'll hear about in the coming days. But Josh, what is your impression from that list? It's kind of all over the board with exactly what we would expect from like who the Bills are looking at, right? Like DB, some interior D line, and some wide receivers. But what do you think? Does it give you any hints on kind of what the Bills might be thinking here for the draft?
Yeah, I think they're really looking at the board and figuring out, our quarterback's going to run early, our receiver's going to run early, our tackle's going to run early, and based on those, you could there's probably going to be a really good player that drops to us. And I think we're going to have to weigh that against probably a thinner class or a thinner amount of the receivers that we really want to take at that high. And maybe back. So I think you're starting to look at, like that Cooper DeJean. I think, he's a guy that if the Eagles and a couple other teams choose to address different positions, he might fall. And I don't think you can pass a guy like that up as the Buffalo Bills, because let's face it, a lot of people are looking at it and saying we need to draft we need a receiver day one. We will be just fine if we didn't even draft a receiver this entire draft. We have Josh Allen. Josh Allen is the guy, right? Like I don't think our offense. Do we have? What's the last time we lost a game by more than one possession in general? It's been like 2.
Oh, wow.
So you look at and a lot of that. In the second half of the year, that was all Josh Allen on his back, and Cook came out and did some things. But in general, I think it's showing that they're going to be true to their word and go best player available, and they're certainly doing their due diligence.
Love that. What do you think, Carson?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like when you look at it, as of my count, this could be slightly off and more in the favor, I guess. But we got 5 wide receivers who've come in, so I mean they know what they need, and I think it comes down to like they realize they need some help here in a thin defensive back room. They've had some guys come in, and I think ultimately a surprise position here that could be a second, third round or later in the draft, depending on who falls and who's selected, is probably the running back position. I mean, we lost Damian Harris as he retired recently. Latavius Murray's out the door. Ty Johnson came back, but I think they're still looking for a guy to complement, that type of role between him, Cook, and Ty Johnson. So I really do think they're gonna look, see how the board falls, if they can trade up, trade down, making an adjustment there. But as far as it goes, defensive back and wide receiver here are, in my opinion, heavy favorites to be selected here on day 1 and early day 2.
Yeah, you guys made some excellent points there. Josh, you mentioned it. It's funny you said that, because Carson and I said it right before you jumped in before the show about potentially a guy that they could take if there's a guy they fall in love with that they need to take. I feel like they're going to take that. We were talking about Cooper DeJean in that specific scenario. He feels like a guy that if he falls to 28, you almost have to take him if he's your best player on the board for what he can do for this defense, the kind of chess piece that he is to move around. I could definitely see a guy like that. Maybe if one of the edge rushers or one of these D tackles that they're in love with that is supposed to go, I don't think it's going to happen, but say a Chop Robinson falls to 28. Are they going to pass up on that guy? I'm not sure if they would. Those are the kinds of scenarios you're thinking of too, right? Where if one of those guys falls, they're going to have some hard conversations in that room.
Not even that, right? Because even look at it like the tackles that are on the board. If the receivers run quick and the tackles fall, Spencer Brown is last year on the contract this year, and he's been up and down. He had a good season last year, but I'm sure the Bills would look at that and go, well, and Dawkins isn't getting any younger either. I think they're in a good position to go best player available. And I think the other thing about the receiving class is I think you get starters, day 1 starters, and even in the 3rd round. And I think the drop off after those top 3 guys is pretty significant. And I think once you get to that next kind of grouping, it kind of runs the gamut, and it's kind of which one's going to fit your offense the best. I think they could find a guy in the 3rd round there. So yeah, it's going to be exciting. I could see him trading back too.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. Like, especially like a guy who really catches my eye, who I know had a ton of hype coming into the fall, was Laiatu Latu. Like, I mean, that guy, he's had his fair share of injuries in the past, and they've been pretty serious. Yeah. But I think he's definitely a guy who still has plenty of potential, and it was definitely an interesting guy who I thought they brought in, as there's always 1 or 2 of those a year. But it's interesting to look at him, and you got a guy like Devontae Walker as far as wide receivers, Troy Franklin, Xavier Worthy's a little surprising to me as well. But I'm interested to see where they go with this and how it kind of correlates and relates to who the Bills are actually interested in, or guys we're bringing in here just as kind of cover-ups for other teams, so it's not a tell.
Yeah, that's a great point too. It's a great point you guys are making there with whatever they could. That tackle is not something that I thought about either, but yeah, like that's a position that they could use some depth on. It really is. it really could go a number of ways, and that's why I'm interested to hear. We're going to get into it. Let's get into it right now with what your ideal draft scenarios would be, because you mentioned a couple of them, potentially trading back. I don't think that's out of the question, Josh. I really don't think that there's any. I think that any way that you could go, because you think a trade back, say in round one, like you said, all the 6 receivers go in the first 20 or something crazy like that. Your Latu's not there, Carson. Chop's not there. The D tackle, like, it's worst case scenario. You can trade back and then maybe use that ammo to trade back up again in the second or third round, specifically the third round where they don't have a pick right now, and use ammo. It's not like, the Bean trade ups have not, the most famous ones have been in the first round, but it's not only been in the first round. He's gone up in other areas of the draft and gone and get guys that he wanted to get. So let's start with Carson, then we'll go to Josh. If you are Brandon Bean, you're sitting in the war room Thursday night. What are your, like, if you had the option to do whatever you wanted to do, what's your ideal scenario for the first couple rounds? Like, what is your first priority? What are you really trying to get accomplished for the Bills?
Well, I've been on the record for a few weeks now saying I'm on the wide receiver hype train. But as far as the board goes, like, obviously if your guy who you've, really enjoyed and he's at the top of your board isn't there, I think you have to look at different positions. But as far as a trade up or trade down goes, I'd definitely be on the phone with Chicago at 9. I'd like to see if we can get anything done there. If you're Odunze or Marvin Harrison Jr. falls for whatever reason, or Malik Neighbors. But another team I'd also look at is definitely who've caught some smoke lately is the Seattle Seahawks at 16. I feel like that's a more realistic option as far as what you're going to have to give up to get a guy like probably Brian Thomas who will be there. But as far as trade downs, like you said, if 6 teams or if 6 wide receivers who are at a quality in the Bills organization that they feel are gone and they don't really have a round 1 grade, or they feel that they can snag somebody in the second round, I have no problem trading down into the mid 30s. And then, I mean, wide receiver, there's a ton of them out there. At every draft, you're going to see a guy who's in the 5th, 6th round, 4th even, that'll really flash, and they're going to be extremely, extremely solid. So
that's a great point.
I think they can definitely snag 1 to 2 guys later if it ultimately their guys are drafted. But I definitely would prefer a trade up as a fan aspect, and I'd like to see maybe Brian Thomas Jr. or Rome Odunze, if that opportunity is there, become a Bill.
Well, in our Instagram comments, Alternate Alphabet said he really thinks we trade up with the Broncos and go and get Brian Thomas Jr., your guy. So you both are on the same wavelength at the same time right now in the chat. He said, I think the Broncos will go for our 2nd this year, 2nd next year, 1st next year, and the 3 next year. That sounds about right to go to 12. And then he said, take Javon Baker in the 4th or 5th. The double dip has been very popular the last couple weeks in the draft. And Javon Baker is a guy that has been targeted a lot by Bills fans. So I'm of the mind I could see a small trade up. The big trade up for Odunze would be tough to pull off, capital wise. But if you can deal with getting rid of that, that's a guy who's making an instant impact right away. Josh, you mentioned trading back. Is that your scenario? Are you open to trading up and making a big move? What would your be ideal night 1 and night 2 moves?
Well, I mean, Bean, he doesn't like to trade back. I mean, he's not known for trading back. He's known for, like, I have a guy I want and I want to go get him now. But I think in this draft in particular, I think he's really trying to look for value. So my ideal scenario is one of those, key contributor guys falls to us, because let's be honest, when it comes to receivers, Justin Jefferson as a rookie is the exception. Most of them are more like Quentin Johnson, and have years that you're like
Jalen Reagor,
pretty much not. Right? Yeah. And you want this guy to come in and be our number 1? I just don't. It's a hard pill to swallow unless it's one of those top 3 guys. Those top 3 guys are they're pretty sure things for as far as a receiver goes. They're about as sure as you can get. But I do think that if we can get a Coop to fall to us, if we get a major pass rusher, a good D lineman, a good tackle, then I think we take them right where we sit. But if there is a scenario where all of a sudden, the top 4 people on our board are, not the ones that we really want to take right now, or we can trade back to get them, then let's do it. And I think there'll be plenty of people that are trying to get back into the top of the first round to get a lot of those guys that'll be available. And if we can get a 3rd round pick out of it, great. If we can get 2 seconds out of it, even better. There's a lot of room there.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for maneuverability. You said that you would take one of the best players available. Is it Coop? Is that your number one target? Are there any other guys that not a wide receiver that you're falling in love with through the draft process and hoping for?
There are a lot, but I mean, tackle, if Mims could fall to us, I think you'd have to take a look at him. Jazan Newton at D tackle or D line. I mean, he's versatile. He can play a lot of different positions. I think that's like exactly what the Bills like. Those are guys that I would think about. And then, if it does fall a certain way, I think, you're going to have that kind of like, you'll have Troy Franklin there. You'll have maybe one of the receivers that have come on for a visit. Maybe Ladd McConkey's still there. And you're going to be putting them up against the likes of like Kool-Aid McKinstry and Peyton Wilson, who honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we, take a shot on one of those linebackers in the first couple rounds if they all start to slip. And then also, we've got a new guy that's going to be playing center. If Jackson Powers Johnson drops, that's a guy that I could see being saying, hey, you know what, we could have our anchor on the offensive line for the next 5 years at minimum. We got to take him, especially if the draft falls that way. But there's a million different guys this draft is going to be exciting because you don't know what's going to run first and what people are really looking for, because everyone's pretty diverse in the way that they're looking at this draft right now. And I think everybody's been called about a trade at this point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think this is set up to be a crazy draft where we're looking at the most popular mocks the next day, and it's like 7 picks correct or something like that, where there's just someone takes somebody by surprise and it just starts that, momentum, the train, no pun intended there, of just chaos afterwards, where you're like, oh, we didn't think he was going to go and this guy was going to be available, so we have to take him. And it just causes the craziness. I do think that's a great call. I think that's a big possibility with this, especially this first round. I think if the Bills were not going to take a receiver, and if there isn't a receiver that they love, I don't want them to just force somebody, because I will not spew Kaiir Elam hate or anything on this pod today in April. I'm just giving another chance, but that felt like a move where they wanted to pick a corner no matter what, and picked a corner even though it wasn't the guy that they wanted at the top of their board. That's just what it appeared like to me. I don't want them to do that where, say, they don't love a Troy Franklin, but Mitchell and Worthy went, 25 and 20 or something like that, and they're like, oh man, we really need to go get that guy, or whoever it may be. So that does worry me. I love the Powers Johnson idea. It wouldn't be the sexy pick. It wouldn't make fans extremely happy, but move McGovern back to guard and you have an outstanding offensive line. You know what that's going to do is help those receivers get open if Josh Allen has time next year. Edwards was solid. He's a solid swing guard, 6-man. Remains to be seen if he's going to be a solid starter all year. Like, I'm not super confident in this offensive line next year. So I do think that's a move I would like. And just with the trenches in general, if you listen to this show, you know that I've talked about the trenches that's where I would rather have my team be elite. So if there is a Newton available there that they can get and kind of take a swing on him and solidify the interior of that line, either side, I wouldn't be mad about it. But then you have to take receiver at 60 or move up and go get your guy, because I still think it's the pressing need, but don't reach for it either. That's a terrible balance. Like, that's not a great answer, but that's what he's getting paid the big bucks for.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with everything you said. Jackson Powers Johnson, like, he's a guy who I've seen some reports, like, the draft stock might not be as high as it's claimed to be, and if he falls, like, he's a guy, if he falls in the mid of the second round, I have no problem trading up for him. Like, Morse, the center quarterback combination is so important for a number of reasons, whether it's calling protections, the exchange itself. So if we can get a guy who can, be here a staple at center, like Morse was phenomenal. Yeah. But if you can get a younger guy on a cheaper deal for them first 4 years who correlates just with your quarterback and the connection's phenomenal, that's so crucial. And it's always funny because the draft is so complicated. Like the amount of friends that have texted me like, would you take this trade up? And in this situation, and I always ask with, okay, well, who's on the board? Like that's the situation at hand. I'm not going to trade up if I'm not a fan of somebody. So it's so complex, especially when there's teams like this, like you said, with like the 7 mock drafts or 7 people in the first round that are going to be right. Like who knows if it'll even be that many? I mean, I feel like the top 5, you're going to get 1 or 2 surprises, and there's going to be some random guy who everyone was high on who's going to fall. Like, I mean, a guy who like I've fallen in love with is like Brock Bowers, although it's not going to matter for the Bills this year because they got Kincaid. Like that dude should be a really good football player. And he's kind of fallen a little bit to around 16, anywhere from 16 to the 20 range. So
Yeah.
I'll be curious where he falls. And it's just the wide receiver class. I keep coming back to it, but this will be the last time I touch on it probably for the night. But it's just so deep. Like you can get a Roman Wilson in the second, Ladd McConkey, like he's a guy who's in between whether he wants to be a first or second round pick right now, or a guy like Jalen Polk who I've fallen in love with. So there's just so many options in this draft, and it's gonna be one of the most exciting Bills drafts in a while for us.
Yeah, for sure. Jump in what you're gonna add there, Josh.
I was going to bring up the fact that you were talking about the trenches, and you look at what Kansas City's done these last couple of years. They literally traded away one of the best receivers in the NFL, if not the best receiver in the NFL, and then won 2 Super Bowls. And in both those years, it wasn't who were their weapons. I mean, obviously Kelsey, right? But he kind of fell off last year. And then Rashee Rice kind of came on late, but they were a team that was kind of being overlooked by the middle of the season and thought that this was everyone's year to go beat them. And what do? They beat us in the trenches in that AFC divisional game, and then go on to win a Super Bowl. I would love for the Bills to have that type of dominance on both sides of the line. Because I think then, obviously it gives Josh more time. I think Josh has made our offensive line look a lot better than it really is over the years.
For sure.
And at the end of the day, if you give him more time and then you don't give the other quarterback more time or give them less time, it usually works out in your favor. So that was the point I was going to make, is that the trenches are almost as important right now, even from a depth perspective. I think we're a little light right now, depending on how Vaughn comes back.
100%, and that's why it's definitely not a bad way to take a swing at in the first couple rounds. I think that they will address the interior of both lines in those first couple of picks, no matter what. But Carson, it's a great point you made, like about where some of these guys are going to fall. Like Bowers right now is kind of projected at 10 in a bunch of drafts. So the Jets, I feel like it's just because it's the first place that you can actually see him going. Do the Jets really need to draft a tight end? Don't they need a line? Like they need a lineman more than anything else. And if he slips past there, who knows with a guy like that? So there's a lot of talent that's going to be kind of flying around. So it'll be interesting to see. What do we think? We've got some questions here from Alternate Alphabet, and he's bringing up, let me see here. He's asking how we're going to feel about, one of the questions he asked is about how we feel about Von Miller going into the year. I don't know what to expect from Von Miller. I do think that coming back from the ACL is usually a 2-year thing, so we could expect more burst. I don't know how much they think that and how much he really does think that with the pay cut he took and everything else. Like he might be just fully aware of where he is, and that feels like Epineza and Rousseau are going to be the starters there at this point coming into next year. And then he bringing up an idea would be the trade with the Chargers. That would be a big trade up to go get one of these top guys. So let's flip into them, because I wanted to ask you guys about some regular questions about the draft. And so if the Bills, let's put our thinking caps on here. Let's put our imaginary hats. If the Bills can trade up all the way to number 5, let's say the first 4 were quarterbacks. JJ McCarthy gets drafted 4th. The Vikings trade up and pick him. Everybody's on the board. The Chargers had a bidding war, and the Bills they would have sent everything, I guess, for pick 5. They were bidding against the league. Who's your favorite out of Harrison Jr., Neighbors, and Odunze? I'll start with you, Carson, then go to you, Josh, because I feel like this was, MHJ is going on all the boards. The first guy he has been for 2 years now. And if you say that, not going to blame you for it. But I feel like it's more open, and there is potential for who the best pro is going to be out of these guys. Not the best pro prospect, but the best actual on the field pro. So what do you think, Carson?
Yeah, I'd probably say, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr., I mean, the hype around this guy has been as high as anybody, I think, in the last 5 or so years, like dating back to Jamar Chase probably. And even then, it's questionable. It's like he's been just so phenomenal these last 2 years in college. And he just is, I think he's an all-around probably type of receiver who in the pass game who's just elite. He can stretch the field for you. He can make contested catches. I really do think he's got potential to be almost like a next Julio Jones type of player. So I think he's definitely my one, but I'd say my 2 is definitely Odunze. I've been a fan of his since basically the fall, and he's a guy who I love as well. I think he could mesh right into this offense extremely, extremely well. They stretch the field a ton at Washington with Michael Penix, and I think this offense is probably it's been missing that deep factor. I mean, Gabe Davis is nice and dandy and all, but the consistency wasn't there for him. So if you can inject, Odunze into this offense, I think it adds a different gear and a different element to this offense of, breakaway speed and a guy who can really stretch the field and open things up for a guy like Khalil Shakir or Dalton Kincaid, who I think is going to be taking that next step here in year 2. So I'd say MHJ, then probably Odunze, then I'd say Neighbors.
All right. Sounds good. I like that. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I think you can't go wrong with any of them, but I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the consensus number one. Just what he's been able to accomplish already, and just the fact that this kid was eating Cheerios and learning from Marvin Harrison himself. I think that's like puts him like 3 steps ahead of everybody in the beginning, and I think he's continued to just improve. He can do anything you want from a receiver's perspective. I think he can go up and get it. He can do contested catches. He runs great routes. And he's been a winner everywhere he's been. And, that we need that type of attitude on our team. I think between Neighbors and Odunze, I think, they're both phenomenal receivers, but they both also had complementary assets that were taking advantage of, that he could take advantage of, that they could both take advantage of. I still think that they're both phenomenal. I'd probably agree with you and go Odunze first and then Neighbors. But I wouldn't be mad about Neighbors at all.
Okay.
Well, we're all in lockstep because that's exactly how I'd rank them. I think Marvin Harrison is one of the biggest sure things we've ever seen in the draft to be a star in the league. Like the guy jumped off the screen for 2 years at Ohio State. Last year didn't have the counting stats weren't as great and everything else, but he was the number one focal point. He's just a stud. The guy can do everything on the field. But I think Odunze is such a good route runner. He's such a the catch radius and the contested catch rate is insane. Neighbors can tantalize you with the explosiveness and everything else, but remains to be seen. That was a really explosive offense in general. I'm not saying that Washington's wasn't either, but I feel like Washington's was because of Odunze, and Neighbors and Thomas were pretty, I think, at least from watching the games all this year, they looked pretty even to me in the impact that they made on the team. And then Neighbors kind of has blown away with his skill set and everything else in the combine and everything that he's done. I don't think you could go wrong with picking Malik Neighbors, but I would go Odunze. I just feel like he's so polished and can make every catch on the field and run every route and everything else. Ryan Cusick asking you if we could see them trading up into the top 10. I think we said that, anything is possible for Brandon Beane. They're definitely there. If Harrison is there, then him, but not Neighbors. That's what alternate alphabet says. But he does say Neighbors is closer in skill to Harrison than Odunze is to Neighbors. So he's got the ranking a little bit different with us. And then Cusick says Josh and MHJ would feed families for 10 plus years. I don't think we can argue that at
100%.
all. Kincaid breakout year, which is something that you mentioned, Carson. I think that's the most underrated thing about this. And it goes into kind of what you said too, Josh, about the Chiefs build the last couple of years and everything else. Because it feels like Kincaid is going to be the number one, get the most targets on this offense no matter what next year. Like, that's how I feel it. Like, even with a rookie guy coming in maybe at the end, unless they trade up to the top 10 for one of these guys, I feel like Kincaid is going to be the focal point of this offense. And that's why they can take, a more measured approach at wide receiver in this draft because they already have their first target. And maybe it doesn't work out that way. Maybe it will be, Samuel or Shakir or something else. But the way that the Kincaid kind of developed over the back half of that year, it just feels to me like he's due for like 80, 90 targets this year or whatever the number may be that gets him the top target on this team. Because I think it'll be spread around more often than obviously previous years. We'll see, though. We'll see.
Yeah, for sure.
Ryan Cusick, I wouldn't be surprised if we traded back into the mid-30s and took Ladd or Xavier Legette. We talked about that too. So yeah, there's a lot of options there for everybody. What about, Josh, the second tier receivers? We're talking Thomas, we're talking Mitchell, Worthy, McConkey, Franklin, Legette, all these names that we've seen thrown around that have been, mocked to the Bills. Who's your favorite out of those guys? Who would you like to see in the blue and red next year?
It depends on what we want them to do. I think do we see Shakir and Curtis Samuel as outside guys, and are we looking for a complementary piece that can play the slot well? Because then Ladd McConkey makes a ton of sense. If we're looking for someone to stretch the field, I think the Keon Coleman's and Troy Franklin's, Jalen Polk, I think, and Xavier Legette, I think those are all guys that we should probably really take a look at. But I think there are some other ones that are kind of exciting, like Roman Wilson. I don't think anybody should wouldn't be upset if we took him. And same with maybe like Jermaine Burton out of Alabama.
Ooh,
I think he's the type of guy that everywhere and plays pretty well. And it seems like a draft class that's so talented at the receiver position that some of those guys are getting overlooked. I think there's a good opportunity for us to grab a guy like him.
Yeah,
and Baker. I love it.
Facts.
For sure. I totally agree with everything you just said. It totally depends on what the offense is looking for. If they're looking for a guy to complement, Shakir, to be on the outside, to be your Z or your X, I think that's your play. But if you want a guy who's going to be in the slot, who can, move all over, McConkey's definitely an option. But I'd say Brian Thomas is probably my favorite second-tier wide receiver, followed up by a close Xavier Legette. And then in the later rounds, we talked about it, Jalen Polk. He's a great guy who can, win inside, and he's very versatile. I also like a guy like Ricky Pearsall. Like, you saw him go up and make that heck of a one-handed catch. Like, he takes a hit. I think he has plenty of potential to be your late round or mid to late round gem. And it's like, well, why did my team miss out on him? I think he's definitely a guy to keep an eye on, and I've liked watching him play. So he's definitely a guy who I could see here in the mid to late rounds.
Yeah, there's a ton of great names. Those are all guys that I'd be like, yeah, you're right. I would be happy to see. Do you think, Carson, that it would be? Do you think, just off of what or just your general thoughts on the Bills team going into this year, do you think that it'll be more Samuel or more Shakir in the slot? Because both guys, I feel like, have the ability to do both, but I feel like we'll have a breakdown where one is definitely leaning more towards that. They did mention that they feel like they can put Samuel in the backfield and everything like that. So maybe he is the guy that ends up off the field in those two wide receiver sets, because the two tight end sets are not going anywhere. And if we draft, maybe those are the two guys. Maybe it's just that Samuel and Shakir are the guys on the field, and the rookie is the one that doesn't take the snaps, at least early in the season, to start. But what do you think about where you would have those guys positioned?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I was Joe Brady and probably calling the plays, I'd say Khalil Shakir will be the guy who's primarily in the slot. And this isn't anything against Khalil, but Curtis Samuel is a guy who really is like unlimited in what you want him to do. You could run the ball if you wanted to give it to him. Yep. You could have him in the back. You could have him swing. You could really do anything you want with him. He could play outside. He could play slot for you. He could probably return kicks, punt return, anything. So he's a guy I'd probably move around. He's going to be your adjuster. He can do pretty much anything for you. Khalil Shakir is a guy who has also another factor into this is he has the chemistry with Josh Allen right now.
True.
And it's been, we saw how he finished the year. He had a heck of a season. It's basically his 600 yards, 500 of that came in the second half of the year. So he is a guy who's definitely going to take that next stride, I think, when he's given the opportunity and the minutes. And he's shown that he can get the job done. So he's a guy I definitely would not sleep on. And as far as Curtis Samuel, I think we should be excited because he is a merchant of everything. So if he stays healthy, So he's got an explosiveness on this team that I think lacked last year, like we talked about before.
Yeah, me and you remember the pod before they signed him? It was you and I on here, Carson. We were like, oh man, if we could get Curtis Samuel, we'd be so excited. Like that was probably one of our best podcast moments we've had here. We called it, called our shot, and then the day before the next one he came out. But Josh, what do you think about Samuel and Shakir? How do you imagine them deploying them this year?
Yeah, I think ideally they want them both on the outside, but they both have the ability to play the slot, and I think a lot of it will be determined by how that draft board goes.
Yeah.
I certainly don't see tight end sets going away. I wouldn't even, be surprised if we didn't have 2 running backs and 2 tight ends on the field half the time. I will say Shakir, and I think some of the questions about Joe Brady when he took over and the offense from a yardage perspective and TDs kind of went down a little bit. You kind of felt like we were kind of forcing the ball to Diggs too often, and not a lot was happening. And the efficiency of Shakir and how he came on it late in the season, I mean, it kind of makes you excited. Like, what if he got double the targets? What would that have looked like? And he wasn't catching just screens and slants. He was getting downfield and he was making contested catches and he was doing good things. I think it's also a case to be made to send all of our receivers to work out with Eric Moulds every offseason, because that guy came back an animal after that, and he's back there working with him again. I'd love to see if Shakir takes that next step, and all of a sudden we're like, hey, we drafted a number 2 receiver because this guy's our guy.
Yeah, the more Eric Moulds involvement with wide receivers, the better. I will definitely second that, Josh. That's a great point. And yeah, I'm interested to see it. I think that I agree. I think they want them both on the outside if they can. They both have that ability to. And how this board falls definitely plays a lot into it. But I think that that's the great thing about the 2 guys that they have at the top of their depth chart at the moment is that they are so versatile and they can really do anything. Alternate Alphabet, who thank you for chiming in this whole show. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, if you really think about it, like across the board right now in this offense, you could have Dalton Kincaid lining up outside. You could have a running back lining up outside. We have so much versatility built in. You mentioned it, Carson, with Curtis Samuel. He could be in the backfield. Like, I don't know how a defense can prepare for this offense at this point. And that's not even drafting anyone yet. And that's what my point earlier was. I think this is already a top 10 offense in the NFL, and we haven't even gotten through our draft. And I think, you look at that and it's exciting because, I think they've done a great job at drafting over these past few years. And if they really felt like they could let go of Gabe Davis and Diggs, then I'm excited for it, because then they see something that we're not seeing, or they're excited about the same things we're seeing.
Well, I think there's something underrated, and this is just about discourse in the NFL in general, but James Cook was a top 5 running back in the league last year, like yards, everything else. Just, running back's not valued as high, but if you have a guy that's a top 5 running back on paper, and say Kincaid they think is going to be a top 7 tight end in the league, maybe top 5, whatever else they think about him. Like, those are 2 guys at positions. No, you don't have the flashy receiver room, but you got top guys at the other 2 skill positions in the league. Like, maybe that's what they're just looking at. Like, the receivers will be fine as long as those receivers are decent. We have like not just guys at these positions now, which I would say that's what it kind of felt like. Knox had a couple good years touchdown wise and everything else, but he's just a solid player. And then other running backs, Singletary, everything else, like solid above average guys, but not stars. If you have 2 stars at those positions, you don't need the superstar receiver. And then if you get it, who knows? You can't be stopped. So I do think that people should be higher on this offense than they are even without any moves. A couple comments here. Have you guys looked at any of the later running backs? He said about 5th round. Ryan answered, if I want a running back, I take Esteem. We talked about Esteem. He had the visit today. I think he'd be a great pick if they can get him in the 4th round to add as like a little thunder to James Cook's lightning. Shakir having the highest catch percentage in the whole NFL is definitely helps where you could put him really anywhere. Ryan Cusick saying, I want to go wide receiver round 1 and 2, DT round 4. And then if we get a 3rd round pick running back, and then round 5, grab a safety. So Ryan's got it all planned out. We just got to call him up and let him know. I wouldn't mind if we signed Stephon Gilmore for 1 year. Hey, I wouldn't. I think that's a good. I think that those are two options too, where we're talking about receiver later in the summer too, where they could sign a guy later on and really fill that role for the year. You know, if it's an Odell Beckham who we've rumored for 2.5 years now, if he finally shows up, Cortland Sutton not showing up to camp today. I saw a lot of chatter on the internet about the Bills trading for him, a 4th-round pick. That's not a guy I wouldn't mind taking a swing on, who's never had a good quarterback in his career. Same thing with, like, that's why I feel so good about Samuel. Like, okay, Curtis Samuel's been a decent guy who can get open a ton in his career and has never had a quarterback worth a damn throw to him in the league. So taking those swings on guys. All right, we'll finish it up here with talking about some quarterbacks, not Bills wise, but this is just it's so interesting to me how we've gotten to where we are with the quarterbacks. Carson, you look like you've got thoughts already. So I'm ready to hear from our resident quarterback and then hear from you, Josh, after. But I'm starting it with this because Caleb's going number 1. We know Caleb Williams is going number 1 to the Bears. It's the worst kept secret in the NFL at this point. But Caleb Williams versus the field. Who would you take and how would you rank the field next to Caleb? And would you take one of those guys over Caleb? Do you feel as strongly about him at number 1?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I've said this before, but if there's a guy who I'd consider in a spot that I would feel fit my offense better than Caleb Williams, it'd be Drake May. I think Drake May is a guy who has got all the potential in the world. If he's in the right system, you can, grow him correctly and give him some help and support. But as far as Caleb Williams goes, I think he's going to be phenomenal. He's got all the talent in the world, and he has probably some of the most hype as a quarterback since Joe Burrow. So when I look at him, the only concern I have is all the drama and stuff off the field and whether or not he can be a true leader. I have some doubts there, but as far as rankings would go, I'd say Caleb Williams, then Drake May, then probably I'd go Michael Penix, and then JJ McCarthy. Like JJ McCarthy, I'm higher on than most. He wasn't asked to do a ton. I mean, he had a lot of help and support in Michigan, but I think he's a guy that his game could translate to the NFL if given a little bit of time. I'd say I wouldn't be comfortable with him being my week 1 starter. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
But this is going to be a talented group, I think, here, and it's got potential to stack up and be one of the best QB draft classes in probably the last 2, 3, 4 years.
I like it. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I think obviously Caleb Williams, but when it comes to that second and third guy, I agree with you. I think Penix Jr. is highly underrated as a passer. I think he's got all the physical attributes that you really look for. He ran a great offense. He's the type of guy that I could see continuing to just improve every year and be one of those guys that's a stud going forward. I like JJ McCarthy. I like Jaden Daniels. I think Jaden Daniels had a lot of weapons that he was able to throw to, but so did Penix. And you can't give him shit for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, you want more weapons. Drake May, I think, is a talented guy. I think you're right. I think there's going to be out of this draft class. I think there's going to be 4 or 5 guys that are quality starters, and that hasn't happened in a number of years.
Yeah, for sure. For what it's worth, Jaden Daniels is my 3, so forgot I left him out.
Yeah.
I knew you'd get back around to him, Carson. No worries. But yeah, I don't think you can go wrong. I really feel strongly, about the top 3 guys that they're all going to be very good. I think Daniels is the highest risk, but potentially the highest reward, depending on how he continues to develop as a passer. And that's no shade to Caleb. That's more just, I watched Jaden Daniels and I'm like, holy shit, what can this guy actually be in the NFL? Almost like you kind of saw with the film and the hype around Anthony Richardson last year, where he ends up the 3rd guy. But it's like, man, what can this guy actually be when he kind of develops just from the athletic tools? That's what Jaden has. Obviously, he doesn't have the same kind of size and the size of strength that he has, but he's electric running the ball, and that's going to make him effective day one. May has all the physical tools, and that guy can just throw the ball 70 yards down the field. It's going to be crazy to see him. And Drake May like really got hurt by a team that just wasn't as good as they were 2 years ago this year. Like that's what hurt his draft stock as much as anything else. And Caleb, if anybody's watched Caleb Williams for the last 4 years, since he made that surprise start for Oklahoma in the Red River game and came in and went crazy and he put himself on the map. You know exactly what you're getting. I live here in Chicago and fans they're ready for Caleb. They're ready for Caleb to come in, and it's going to be exciting to see him with that offense, especially if they stay put at 9 and draft in a Dunze or a Neighbors or whoever drops to them and add them to Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. Whew. Yeah. That's how you set up a quarterback for success.
Oh yeah, yeah you do. Talk about the rawness. The guy like Joe Milton and like probably the 3rd, 4th round, depending on how high like GMs view him. Man, he's got some of the most like just natural arm talent. Like he can throw the ball 100 yards. It is just crazy. He's a guy I'd love to see look back 5 years from now. And I want to know whether, how his career is going to pan out, because there's almost no in between, I think, from him being an absolute steal and a stud all-pro quarterback to a guy who's come just out of the league. So I think he's as raw as they come. But, man, he has so much talent. He's going to be a fun guy to watch them this preseason.
Yeah. Someone's going to take a shot on him, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just based on arm talent and physical attributes alone.
I think the Browns take him early, second or 3rd round.
I've seen them.
They had him as a top 30 visit. I've seen some smoke around there. That feels like a nice pick for them. I love Joe Milton too. I agree with that. We have one question here on Instagram, then we'll wrap it up, guys. He said, I don't know if you go off topic, but if so, give me the next 5 Super Bowl contenders for this year. He says winners, but I think contenders for this year. So pre-draft Super Bowl power ranking. I'll go first. You got to start with the Chiefs. You got to go with the 49ers. Those are still the 2 class teams in the league. You got to keep the Lions in there. Still really like that Lions team next year. I think Philly makes a good bounce back going into next year. And then I've got to put the Bills in there. The Bills get that spot still over the Ravens, over the Bengals, anything else. Now putting you on the spot here, I think Carson's writing them down and trying to match it out. Josh, you got him in your head there?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Especially before the draft. But how does Joe Burrow come back? Is he the same Joe Burrow he was 2 years ago? Or is he a little off, or whatever it might be? He's got a ton of weapons. But I look back at all these different years, and there's no more years where Trent Dilfer's winning a Super Bowl. It's the best quarterbacks in the league that are winning all these Super Bowls, and I think you can rank them almost and kind of deliver just from that. I think you're right. Kansas City is they won the Super Bowl, and 2 years in a row, and they're going for a three-peat. So I think they're number 1 no matter what. But then I think number 2 is kind of up for grabs. So San Fran is definitely the most talented and still is on a rookie contract of a last guy in the actual draft. So they've got a lot of benefits headed their way for these next couple of years. And I think it goes right to the Bills, it goes right to the Lions, it goes right to even the Rams. Depending on how their draft goes, I think they could come back as a really big contender in the NFC. The Packers are up there, starting to make some noise and some stuff going on. Houston has done a ton of work. It's going to be an interesting year. It's not. No one's going to have an easy schedule. It doesn't matter where you were in your division or anything. It's going to be interesting. I think Cincinnati does have a little bit of an upper hand on us in that regard, because they did have a shit record last year, and now they're going to be higher up in the draft and returning a bunch of great players. But I still think the Bills are in the top 3.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. As far as I'd go, I think you got your main 4 that have been solid. You got your Chiefs. I think you got the Lions, who have now emerged, the Niners, and then Jake, you touched on it, but the Eagles, I think, are going to come back solid, and then you got the Bills. But the Bills are interesting because I think it depends on when you play them. I think the first month, there might be a lot of overreactions because, I mean, it's just a complete new core. But after that, I think there's 3 teams that really strike me. It's got to be the Texans. Then I think a team like the Jets could definitely catch some eyes. And I'd probably say I'd probably say, ooh, that's a tough one. I'd probably say the Cleveland Browns, if they can click.
Yeah, the Browns' talent level for a couple years has been insane. Just that they haven't been able to put it together is, there's obviously a lot of factors going into that, but that's not bad. And that's the thing, like we probably named, I think, 12, 13 different teams there all together between that group. We didn't even say the Ravens, who were the best team in the league, best record in the league last year, have the MVP. Like that's a team that could do some damage next year. I love the Rams. You mentioned them, Josh. I definitely overlooking them. They were awesome last year, and they have a first round pick for the first time in like 5-6 years. Like they're going to reload with some talent. But yeah, it's a great point about the Jets too. Like if Rodgers comes back, if they get help on that offensive line, they've made a lot of moves to go all in for this year. It could be that kind of year. So it's going to be a fun year, but nice question. Thank you for all the chatter on Instagram, and appreciate you guys following along. We paid the bills, boys. Thank you to Outlet Liquor, our sponsor, your place to buy a case. So for this podcast, for Carson, for Josh, this is Jake. Have a great night. Next week is draft night. We'll be here locked in for some coverage online and on site, I believe, in some places in Buffalo. I don't know if that's been announced, but we'll let Maniac announce that. He'll be on location somewhere in the city of Buffalo for draft night, getting reactions from the fans. So have a great night, folks. Go Bills.